Hello and welcome to the NICU Space podcast by Miracle Moon. I'm Dr. Frankie Harrison, a clinical psychologist and a NICU parent myself. Through my work as a psychologist and through my own experience of having a baby in neonatal care, I know that the NICU journey can leave a huge emotional impact on parents and families. This podcast is a space where we talk honestly about that experience. We will be exploring the emotional impact of neonatal care, the anxiety, the guilt, the grief, the questions about bonding and identity, the parts of the experience that so many parents carry long after leaving the hospital. Across the series, I'll be speaking with other NICU parents at different stages of their journey, as well as professionals working in the field. We want you to feel seen, understood, and less alone in what you've been through. So whether you are currently sitting beside an incubator, recently home from NICU, years down the line still making sense of it all, or someone supporting a NICU family, you are very welcome here. What you have been through matters, and you do not have to carry it on your own. Before we begin, just a quick note that this podcast is for information and support, but it is not a substitute for individual medical or psychological care. Now, let's get into today's episode. Hello, and welcome to the Miracle Moon podcast. Today, I am talking to Anandé, who is a paediatric occupational therapist with a special interest in sensory integration and playfulness. She's also a preemie NICU mama to two of her children, to her two young boys. She's based in South Africa, and we talk about her personal experience and her professional experience. So personally, she talks about that matrescence experience and how she has therefore gone on in her work to include support for maternal development, NICU families. And in 2026, she launched a podcast called Beyond Beeps and Hunt, which focuses on early development, parenthood, and the lived experience of families navigating those complex beginnings. And I was recently a guest on her podcast as well, so we've done a little bit of a swap. So in this episode, we talk about Anandé's NICU experiences, how therapy helped her have more capacity and understanding for her second NICU stay. We also talk about her experience of a fire happening at her hospital. So I just want to let people know that we do talk about this. And it was a tricky time, obviously, for her as well. We talk about how we can play with our kids, how sometimes it feels like it becomes a task or something that we have to get right. And I confess that sometimes I find it boring to play with in the way that they want. And we explore a little bit about that. We also talk about our sensory profiles of ourselves and our kids and how they interact. So there is tons crammed into this episode, and I'm really looking forward to you hearing it. Please let me know how you find it, and let's get into it. Hello, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm so happy to see you. I'm so excited for today's conversation.
Yeah, me too. We've done a little podcast swap, haven't we, at the moment? So I was
Yes,
on as a
we
guest on
have.
your podcast recently.
Yes.
So we're doing a little bit of a swap, but I'm really happy that we've connected. And this is the power of social media. It is what I like about social media, is being able to meet other people who have got similar passions and experiences as well. So thank you so much for coming on today and for talking to us.
I'm so excited.
So let's start. Tell me a little bit about you. So tell me a little bit about you professionally and a little bit about you personally, because I know that worlds have kind of collided in a similar way to me as well.
Yes, amazing. So I am a pediatric occupational therapist, and I've always had an interest in working with little humans and their families, and really looking at whatever it is that families and children find difficult. So from play to self-care to schooling. So really a broad scope, and working from babies to about like 10, 11, 12. It's usually where my age range has been. And it's been so interesting because a big part of my caseload, looking back in their histories and the intake interviews, had been families of either premature babies or NICU babies or medically complex little ones. So a really large piece of my caseload has been kind of looking at life later on and some of the struggles and needs that sometimes, and I do want to reiterate, because I know it can be quite stressful for families. It doesn't mean everyone will have needs, but that there is a big part of the population population that might, and that support is there. So I was always on that side as a therapist supporting families and little ones. And then came my own journey, and it really was a struggle from the get-go. So we struggled to fall pregnant. So I have what has now been retermed as polyendocrine metabolic ovarian syndrome, so previously known as PCOS. I didn't know it
Hmm.
immediately, so there was like 2 years, and it was over COVID. So a lot of the times, no, you're stressed, all those things were blamed. It was
Right.
really difficult journey. And then eventually I got my diagnosis, which took very long, but explained so much.
Mm.
And then entered into fertility treatments and eventually IVM and then IVF cycles to conceive our first little one. And it was, I know there's so many different journeys with that as well, but he was our fifth embryo. So it was quite a process. And I took a break
Yeah.
from fertility treatments as well because it really became very difficult and very stressful in so many different ways. So I feel like from the get-go, it was much harder than, you know,
Mm-hmm.
you, you think it's going to be. And then it really was that every week of that pregnancy that there were things that we were worried about, this measurement and things. So it was difficult to get pregnant, and I do feel like the pregnancy was something we were so excited for, but there was always something they picked up that we had to check, and then okay, it's fine. And then eventually we did have premature labor that at the 34-week mark that they tried everything and couldn't stop my premature labor. And I remember asking, because I'd worked with so many preemies, I kept asking my gynae and obstetrician, what are the chances we can stop this? But it
Mm-hmm.
just, yeah, there was no stopping it. So eventually I was rushed into theatre for an emergency C-section. And
Mm-hmm.
as our worlds, and I think, have come together, and our little one was taken to NICU because he immediately couldn't breathe. There was a lot of concerns they had in that moment. And then I
Yeah.
found, and why I bring up IVF for me is that so much of that journey, I did a lot of like visualization exercises of, the
Right.
little one, meeting them, that golden hour, that, those
Yeah.
moments that I feel like I held on to in the hopes of getting there. And then it was just all, it like,
Like the
I
opposite.
often
Yeah.
opposite, and
Yeah.
I often use the
Yeah.
word like, I feel like we were severed, and that whole experience, it just like, like he was severed from me in the dreams. And it was, it was not at all like anyone would hope. It's not the way anyone hopes for things to go. So
No.
we had our first NICU journey with him, and I mean, there were lots of challenges, lots of difficulties with breathing. And I know as your community and audience will all be aware of the different, feeding and everything. And we did leave NICU with more medical needs and things that continued after that point. And I want to fast forward a bit because I'm sure I'll bring in my little boy's journeys in other ways throughout the
Yeah.
conversation. But then I because it took us so long to get pregnant with our firstborn, we decided, okay, well, let's get the process going again and have the conversations. And fortunately, that was my reason for starting therapy. Was I wanted some support in trying to navigate infertility again whilst being, having a little toddler, not knowing
Yeah.
how much of NICU was left behind. So I'm forever so grateful that I thought I was fine, and I'm using air quotes for those just listening, that I really thought I was fine. And I'm so grateful I had that space, and that my therapist was able to just work through so much that I was pushing through and trying to be fine
Yeah.
about, and I really just wasn't. And we we actually cancelled 3 different IVF appointments for different reasons. And in between that, because just family things, we had a spontaneous pregnancy, which was incredible
Wow.
to experience
Yeah.
that very different, journey in comparison to
Yeah.
our first. And then, just having that therapy support, because I was very anxious throughout that pregnancy, and we did everything we
Of course
could,
you were. Yeah. Yeah.
hoping for things to be different. And then,
Yeah.
unfortunately, I preterm labor again, and then had another second NICU journey. So
Okay.
it really has been very interesting being a therapist for so long, working and supporting families. And then I've been in NICU before that. I've, seen little ones, and but being a mum in NICU, when that is like, that
Yeah,
was my
different.
so different. And
Yeah.
I do feel like those NICU journeys have left me forever changed. And it's changed the way I think about things. It's changed how I want to approach things with families and little ones. I can't unsee it. I can't unfeel it. And sorry, it was quite a long intro into that. But, you can empathize, and as a therapist you can be in that space and you can see it, but there's something about that lived experience that it's I feel like every fiber of my being is it just experiences the world so different now. So
Yeah.
that is, I wouldn't say a little bit about me, but I feel like that ended up being
No,
the
that was
long
really,
road.
yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I'm just wondering, just coming off of what you said, just from a personal perspective, if it feels okay to answer, you had the previous experience of the NICU, and then you had therapy, and you did some work, and you said that you felt anxious in the pregnancy. Was there anything different about then being in neonatal care for a second time in any kind of way? Was there anything that helped, or yeah?
Absolutely. And it was very interesting because the first time around, and this is something that we discussed in when you were in my podcast, that you explained so beautifully in terms of the nervous system responses, and I definitely, looking back, I was people pleasing. I was trying to cope in the best way I knew at that time, and not having control. And looking back, I have so much grace for myself of why I felt like I said okay to things that didn't feel okay, or when I was asked to leave for certain things and I didn't fight to stay, or certain aspects of that. So there's a lot that I looked back on that I wish I had done differently, and I wish I approached
Mm,
things differently. Understanding now because of the therapy, and we had such a beautiful conversation about that, but why I did what I did. And there was early on in his admission that I had to be removed from, not removed sounds like a hectic word, but I had a day where I wasn't feeling well, and my blood pressure dropped and things, something went wonky, and they got a porter to take me to my gynae who was at the same hospital for observation. And that day it showed me that I had to be okay, and I'm using air quotes again, in NICU,
mm,
because if I wasn't, I would be removed from him again. And I
right.
think that mentally did a lot of what I thought now I needed to be like, look like, say, not say, and a
Yeah.
role that I had to play, which I did. I do feel so much sadness in ways for things that I think could have gone differently, but I now have the grace and the understanding that I was doing my best. And then fast forwarding to the second NICU, where I emailed my therapist that evening after the emergencies, because it was, I think it was like 45 minutes from when they realized things were not okay. And it was such a chaotic day because I had my toddler with me at the hospital, so I had to get
Oh,
someone to
wow.
fetch him. It really was not at all, again, it's the whole situation. I feel so sad about so many aspects of that. um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I emailed her that evening, and we had emergency sessions the next day and throughout that week. And I advocated for me and that little guy in a way, like a like a mama lion. But it was
Yeah.
because I had the capacity to do that.
Yeah.
When things happened that weren't okay, I had that thinking brain online. I had more resources accessible because my nervous system wasn't flooded. And it was 100% the holding space that she created for me, and the safety that she created for me and my nervous system as things happened. And that second NICU admission, I feel like every NICU journey is so unique, and brings about so many challenges. We also had a hospital fire 26 hours after my emergency C-section. And
Whoa.
it was, I'm going to go into that a little bit if that's okay. I actually haven't
Yeah, of
shared too much.
course.
So
Yeah.
I just come back from I called my shuffle walk from NICU because it was so early after the
Yeah.
emergency. So far, my room was so far from NICU, which is still one of the things that blows my mind that they put the NICU mom so far away. And so I was exhausted by the time I got back to my bed. And I sat down and a nurse came in and she said, grab your phone, there's a hospital fire. And I remember staring at her like, what are you saying? Because the alarms had started going off. But I thought, okay, maybe, your mind doesn't go
Yeah.
into that extreme quickly. And she said it again because I wasn't responding. I was just sitting there, like staring at
Yeah.
her. I think my brain is like, I'm sleep deprived from the past 26 hours, and only way I can explain is I felt like I was living a nightmare in a nightmare already, being in this
Yeah.
room alone, having shuffled back from NICU with my little spoon and syringes, dropping off some colostrum. And she said it again, and luckily, I think, she said, "Can you walk?" And I said yes, and she left the room. She was gone. And my first instinct was to shuffle right back to NICU because that's when my little one, like, we're gonna
Yeah.
evacuate together. But as I was shuffling to NICU, there was already, you could smell the smoke, and there was already that
Oh,
smokiness in the
wow.
air. So it was
Yeah.
very real. Like all the sensory
Oh,
information I was getting is that
terrifying.
there really is a
Yeah.
fire. This is happening, and the
Yeah.
staff as well, like the way they were moving, the expression on their faces, their eyes, and I'm heading back to NICU. That makes sense to my mind. And as I was getting there, like I looked inside, and it was absolute, like like chaos in it because they are trying to get
Yeah.
these little babies onto all the backups that they need. I mean, I can't even imagine. And I was like a little bit frozen in that moment, looking, because I think my brain is still like, what is happening? And then some of the maternity staff actually grabbed, I had two staff members that grabbed onto either side of me. And they were like, you know what, we need to go to the exit. I'm like, no, my baby, like my baby is in there. Like, what do you mean? And they like started gently kind of putting me away from NICU because they said like
Oh,
you
wow.
can't be there. They needing to do their own evacuations. You can't you have to come with us. And I remember I had so many people say to me, I could never do that. I could never. I was like, it really wasn't a choice for me. Like
No.
they actually closed the NICU door. Someone closed the door because their exit was in a slightly, they could go out another way and they started pulling me away from NICU. And and I
Wow.
say to people, like, they're like, why didn't you fight more? I'm like, I'm 26 hours after an emergency C-section. I still sometimes don't, like, I wasn't even like upright. Like I was still so hunched over. I remember, and they were starting to drag me away. And like at a point, I think when I was probably far enough away, because I was still protesting with my voice, like I couldn't with my body as much, but that internal fighting what my body was able to do. I mean, the door was now closed and it has a code, so there was no way I could get in. But in that last moment they closed, I was still looking at where his little station was.
Mm.
And it was so strange because I think everything happens in slow motion and fast at the same time, thinking
Oh,
about
yeah.
at that point I still hadn't hold him. I'd like had a very brief, like, as you drop off, the, that was the second time I'd ever walked to NICU was with this fire. And then think about the last time I saw my toddler, which was just absolutely chaotic, and he was pulled from me because I had to go into theater and someone came to fetch him, and Ryan, my husband, eventually came, and it was like absolute chaos. So I was thinking about all the last time I'd seen all my family members, as
True.
one does, like you go to such a funny place, and the staff and I are trying to get me out as quickly as they can within my physical state. And then eventually I'm walking out with one person, and it was this like long hallway to where the first evacuation point was, and standing there. And it was, I think, again for me, it was such the difference between when you're in the NICU and you're not. Because as
Yeah.
I was alone because Ryan was home with our toddler, and the other moms and dads from the unit, who the moms were in a wheelchair with their baby and dad pushing,
Oh,
like, and I think it was
yeah.
it was it like really pulled at your heart, like that visual difference
Oh,
of these little family units having been evacuated together and having this second separation from my baby that I tried to fight as much as I could but couldn't. And it took 30 minutes. It took very long for them to evacuate the NICU babies. Understandably so, everything that had to go on backups and I mean every NICU nurse's face that I saw, like you could just see.
Yeah.
And my amazing gynae and obstetrician was still on call, and she looked at me and realized that the NICU babies were still, not all of them, they'd been coming out one by one, but the unit was
Right.
full, so they had a lot in their hands, and she started running in as well. Like, it was incredible to see, like, so many people really, like, running literally back into a building that is on fire to help these little babies. And they were coming out one by one, and as they were coming out, I would go up to each little incubator, kind of checking, is it him, is it him?
Yeah.
And it took like just over 30 minutes before I was reunited with him outside, which
Oh,
was, I mean, it's 30
must have
minutes
felt like
south, but
forever.
it felt like forever. And all the time,
Yeah.
like, you could see the orange hue in the light, like air. And so you were very aware, this is not a drill. This is not, there's an active fire on our side of the hospital. And it was growing. They weren't getting it under control. And at a point, while I was still waiting for him to come out, they had moved us to a second evacuation point further away from the hospital because of the explosion risk with all the oxygen lines in hospital. So it was like very real, and I'm still
Yeah.
alone. And eventually was reunited with him again. And then I think this is just where I still don't know how some of that, we then had to move again further away from the hospital, and that was a very far, and I was like pulling his little unit. But yeah, it was like I said, it really was a nightmare and a nightmare, this whole process. And then eventually getting to the next evacuation point where they were doing triage and then transferring us to other hospitals. And I still think that if I didn't, and again, I got, as soon as I had a moment where I knew we were both safe and we were in the ambulance onto the next hospital and we arrived there, I emailed my therapist again. I'm like, okay, so this just happened. Can you see me
Mm.
tomorrow? Because
Yeah.
it was just, I think, so many more of those forced separations and the, like, really, like, there were numerous points where I wasn't sure if we would be okay and if everyone would be okay. And the staff was incredible, and how they handled everything was amazing. But it was just bizarre. I still sometimes feel like, did all of those things happen? But
Mm.
he had a very difficult NICU journey, as like very different from our first one. But
Okay.
with the second NICU worked very different, which was very interesting, because in our country, every NICU pretty much runs, in the private sector, runs, has its own protocols and its own, like, I'm sure there's like a standard practice
Mm.
of care, but they make their own decisions within that. So I had to advocate for lots of different things that I didn't have to advocate for in the other NICU. But I was very grateful
Okay.
that I feel like if it wasn't for being in therapy, if I was the version of myself that I was in the first NICU journey, I don't know if, like, things like kangaroo key, like, it's like very basic things, but that I knew were so important long term.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and he had lots of feeding difficulties, and his coil that caused his heart to stop. And it was like, I really
Oh
had
wow.
to be much more of a lioness the second time around. But I feel like I was able to be that because of the therapy space.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is again, I feel like a very long winded way of explaining so much. But
It's
I just,
important.
it's,
Yeah.
I think without that support, I don't know what would have happened that second time around, because
Mm.
I really had to be on top of things in a much different way. And I often wonder what his outcomes would have been if
Yeah.
I wasn't able to be, on it in the way I was, which is never
Yeah.
nice to be like that. But
No,
yeah,
I know.
yeah.
What impact do you feel like those experiences have had on your work in the way that you support people in what you want to do? How has it changed that?
Oh my goodness. I just think it's you don't understand the way that I feel like things live in the nervous system, and how,
Yeah.
it's the, even in hindsight, looking at our first journey, how much I was carrying, but expressing it in different ways in my behavior and how I
Mm.
was going about things. And it was the same the second time around, but I feel like I was so much more aware of it, and I feel like I was able to because I processed things more and I could see things more for what they were. I
Mm,
could help myself and my little one in a much more active way. And I think having that knowledge, because whether it is the societal messages and the combination of that with our nervous system responses, I think a lot of NICU families hear you, and you are so grateful that you are graduating. And I never want to minimize how incredible it is to graduate from NICU. But I think my concern now is the nervous system states of both baby and mom and dad and the family unit. And just we're expecting them to high five. Aren't you glad you move on with life now? And I think for me now it is that quality of life beyond the NICU doors that has become such
mm,
just something I feel so passionate about. And I know it's things that we'll tap into a bit more today, but from the looking at nervous systems and how the sensory systems experience those early experiences, and how
yeah,
that impacts life, to play and engaging in school, and for parents work. And it's just, I think I'm looking at things so much differently. And I think so often we
yeah,
to give parents more strategies and more scripts and more of this, that adds more pressure, rather than first understanding what have they gone through, what has this little baby gone through, what has mom and dad experienced, and starting
mm,
there. I think that
yeah,
they don't need more pressure, they don't need more. Sometimes we almost just need to take it a step back to that foundation of, of their nervous system, and seeing
for
how
sure.
is this impacting their day to day, because it is. And I think because I've lived it now twice in very different ways, I can't unsee it. And I think it's for me, it's just changed. I think the pressures that come with modern day parenting and just being in this world, I really think that we're adding more when we should be just listening first and understanding first, and meeting
Yeah.
parents where they are.
I completely agree with that. And I think one of the things, like, as I was looking through your Instagram, the Play More OT Instagram, there was, I kind of went into thinking about how we could discuss play, but actually, what you were saying about things like play is a nervous system state, it's
Mm,
not just an activity. I would love for you to talk to us a little bit more about that, because I think we do get wrapped up in being like, oh, I'm not playing with my kid enough, or there's this
yeah.
pressure to be playful, or like you said, the
Mhm.
scripts or how you're supposed to
Mhm.
do it and all of
Mhm.
that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
But can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by it being a nervous system state?
Absolutely. So I often see play as an indicator of health and well-being. And for me, that applies to children and parents as well. That if we
Mm,
have, and I'll use the example of a child first, because I think sometimes we can understand that more. A child who is sick, and I'm not even saying like very extreme cases, like if your child has cold or flu or fever, they're not engaging in play. I think often one of the first things that parents say is, oh, they're not playing with their blocks, or they're not engaging in the world in the way I know
mm,
them to engage and to be. And if we take that little example, and that's why I say indicator of both health and well-being, that to me it applies when I'm sitting here in South Africa, and from my research and even my clinical work, I work across different income brackets and things. So even the living circumstances, from poverty to what I've said now of modern parenthood and the stresses and the rushing and life, where there's different stresses that both kids and parents experience. And like I can even see it with that when our little ones are very stressed, and they actually can't access and enter into this deep, beautiful focus and engagement that comes with play, which to me is a bit of
mm,
a like it makes you sad in two ways, because it's the one thing that will likely also help regulate them more, and it'll help bring them back to balance and equilibrium. But now it's also something that's so hard to access when you are stressed and you can't enter into that flow experience, because your nervous
yeah,
system is in a heightened, it's either, if we're looking at a little one who might kind of be looking over the shoulder, is my environment okay, is it safe, can I, if we're not feeling safe in ourselves and our environment to engage in deep play, it becomes very difficult. And I have so much more empathy for parents, especially with our own experiences, where I think there's so many strategies and cute little tips and tricks on Instagram, which yes, sometimes they do have their place, but I think it sometimes can make you just feel like you're failing even more, because
Mm.
we're trying to get out the door and now someone's suggesting that we sing a song, or and yes, that can be beautiful, but sometimes accessing that playful state in yourself when you feel like and it's a imagery I like to use on my account, where I say your bucket is overflowing. It is, you've got rocks in it, and there's just so much sensory input, and when you never have the opportunity to down regulate yourself, to work on whatever the rocks are in your bucket, but to get yourself to a state where you can access that Mary Poppins singing a song while we're doing things, it can feel very hard because you're living in that survival mode, trying to get from the next thing to the next to the next. And I think there's so much of where we're trying to simply survive, and I think this is for children and adults alike. I don't think there's necessarily as much thriving as I would like to see in, I
Yeah.
think, day-to-day families.
Did you know that the NICU space is more than just this podcast? We also run an online community created specifically for NICU parents, whether your baby is currently in neonatal care or your NICU experience happened months or even years ago. Inside the community, you'll find specialist guidance from professionals who understand NICU, resources and coping tools to help with the emotional impact, and most importantly, connection with other parents who really get it. For many parents, it becomes a place where they can finally talk about their NICU experience with people who understand without needing an explanation. If this sounds like something that would support you, you can find out more information in the show notes. Let's get back to the episode. I think I can relate to that so much. I think I remember that bit of being like just feeling this pressure to play, and I think I still have it at times of my daughter coming up to me and go, "Can you play with me?" And I'm like, I'm doing things.
Yes,
And it can feel really hard to step out
yeah.
of that mode of being like, I've got all this stuff to do, to then step into being in this make-believe world and the way that she plays, and even stuff I've noticed for myself of like, it's her opportunity to direct play and direct me. So she will often tell me I'm doing it wrong, because I think that that's just her wanting some control, and like she wants to tell me like I'm getting it wrong. But it's noticing my own reaction to that and being like, oh, because I want to go. The inner child in me goes, I don't want to play with you then. Back up, like, no, take a step back. This is what it's about. It's about her having some control. But I just think being able to recognize our nervous system states a little bit more, and being able to take that step back and saying to ourselves, okay, I'm in this rushing mode, or I'm feeling a little bit more heightened. Maybe I just need to like go to the loo, take a couple of breaths, and then come back, and then I can engage with it. I think that's really
Yes,
important.
absolutely. Yes. Sometimes it's just giving that nerve, like giving yourself first a chance to regulate and go to the bathroom, eat a little snack. I think there's so many like ways which our own sensory systems are just, whether it's like the physiological dysregulation because we, like I said, we've got so much to do, and we ate like maybe a crust of a bread like this morning, and it's like nearly 3
Hmm.
p.m. and your blood sugars also, and life is just lifing. And it is sometimes just going, okay, I need to go take a few deep breaths. Maybe I do some
Yeah.
deep pressure compression work, and then enter into the playful state. But it is to just notice that, okay, maybe I need something, I need a little bridge before I can enter their world. And I think then
Yeah.
it makes so much difference between saying yes or no. Is sometimes just
Yeah.
saying, okay, give me a minute. And
Mm.
I think there's nothing wrong with sometimes just understanding that we do need a minute before we're able to into that world. And sometimes it can happen, like I've trying to on my account to share more of what you can do, because I have two very little humans. The one's 1.5 and the one's just over 3. For me, it's not an option to always like go do something for an hour, or like that's not, I have to regulate myself in their presence very often. And sometimes it can be like lying on the floor and I will pretend to be a volcano taking deep breaths, and
Mm,
eventually, especially the 3-year-old will think it's very funny. And then I think
mm.
laughter is also amazing because it can change up the nervous systems completely. But sometimes I will lie on the floor pretending to be, even it'll be a spout of a whale or something, to first just be like, I need to take a few deep breaths before this next thing happens.
Yeah.
And understanding that sometimes it doesn't have to look, I think also the way I think sometimes we think regulations should look like, we don't always have time to journal or do this or do that, and those are beautiful. It has its place, but I also think sometimes we need quick, simple regulation tools to just get us, and again, going back to that imagery of the bucket, sometimes we just need to pour out enough out of our bucket so that we can be
Mm,
playful. Not saying go
yeah.
and empty the whole thing, there isn't always time and opportunity for that, but sometimes we just need enough regulation tools in our kit to just pour out a little bit so that we can enter into that playful state with our little ones.
Yeah, I love that. I definitely speak about that a lot because I think people just assume it looks like a spa day, a bath, a yoga session, like all of that kind of stuff. And it can just look like a couple of breaths or feeling your feet on the floor or looking out of the window and just focusing on what you can see, just micro moments. My favorite one is that walking around the car and just doing a few breaths after you've strapped them in to come and sit down. Just those little moments as well. I also I wonder whether the neonatal unit, and I'm interested in your perspective on this, whether the neonatal unit actually trains us away from free play. Because so much about how we interact with our babies in the NICU is structured and it's purposeful and it's doing and it's action and it's cares at this time and all of that kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. Do you think that that impacts how we parent afterwards and maybe our interactions with play?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think everything becomes so measured and so specific in the NICU, and it
Yeah.
has a very specific reason and an outcome that we are working towards. And I think I see it even with things like with, I'm going to use tummy time as an example because it's often one of the earliest things that we do when we leave. And online, there's so much information of tummy time needs to be so many minutes. And it's again all these
Mm,
measures, which now as a NICU parent we like because it is giving us a little bit of a sense of control and a little bit of I know what I'm doing, because it's so
yeah.
hard when you go from that environment where you feel like you really knew what you were doing or being told or instructed to now kind of having to feel things around a little bit more. And I do think that play becomes almost more of a checklist item than a
Mm,
joyful experience, if I can explain it like that. And what I often see is that it becomes just something we need to, okay, this week window, we need to make sure we're doing this, this, and this. And I think we miss out on, for me, like play is so beautiful and it's meant to be joyful. It's meant to be, especially in these early weeks and months home and beyond that, it is for connection and it offers beautiful regulation. And I think where we go from, okay, we need to do something, we need to do, yes, those things are important, but again, just thinking of something so simple where our NICU babies, okay, yes, visually they can't, their system isn't giving them great feedback yet, but they were looking up at a white space. I mean, they couldn't even
hmm
maybe see the ceiling, but it's really visually there wasn't much going on there for them. And then they get to come home, and now we're checking all these things. But I think sometimes what is so beautiful to do is to have your little one on your lap or like on your legs, like I like to, and they can look at your face and to
mm,
have those moments of joyful. And yes, it's not tummy time in that moment, but it's back play, and that's also equally important. And it's giving you this other. But I think because we leave and we hear tummy time is so important, we miss out on all these other beautiful play opportunities and moments with our babies and our toddlers that are very important for development as well. And with that, it's we don't only want to do tummy time, we want to do back play, we do want to do side play, we want to incorporate and strengthen all sides of their bodies. And there's so many ways to do it. But I do
yeah.
think that when it becomes something that's more free, which play is supposed to be, it's not supposed to be something that someone tells you how to do it, how long to do it, the exact steps and instructions. It's then it becomes more of I term it non-play, which makes some people feel a bit uneasy. But to me, it's no longer play now. It's just becoming another thing that we have to do.
Activity. Yeah.
Yes, an
Yeah.
activity, and we lose so much of. I think so much of the benefits from that. And I do think it steals away from the get go that
Mm.
joyful engagement that we're hoping to see and to develop, because I'm using that back play and tummy time as an early example, but that continues in the toddler years. Instead of them engaging and maybe they're interested in how things fit inside each other, or they're interested in taking things apart, which can always be a bit tricky for us as adults. Like, we'll take
Yeah.
out something very structured and say, okay, you're going to color coordinate these things. An example I like to use often is when our little ones are maybe cooking something, especially this like early, just as they're a year old, and they like to cook things and they're mixing things and they're giving us a bite of something to eat, nothing really there, but and then we
Mm.
will try and make it more, I want to say, educational. And we'll say, okay,
Yeah.
what color is your bowl?
Yeah.
How many apples do you have in your kitchen? Let's count them. Want to do other things, and you're giving them all these questions, kind of interrupting this beautiful play process where naturally you could, instead of saying what color is that bowl, you could say, oh, I love red. Red's my favorite. Could I have the red bowl to eat from today? There's slight differences in how
Yeah.
we do it. We come in with this adult agenda in play, is what I call it, because we need to
Mm.
feel it's educational. We need to feel that it's productive. We need to feel that scholastically it will give them an advantage in some way. And we lose so many of the benefits that I truly think that our kids in the future, this unknown future with AI and all the things that I feel like they need,
Mm.
the creativity, the flexible thinking, problem solving, persevering when things get hard. Like, oh, I can't find
Yeah.
the red bowl in the kitchen. Where is mom's favorite red bowl? That we're stealing all these struggles and moments of learning because we feel like, just continuing on from that thing, we need to check as many check boxes as we can. And I think
Yeah.
that if we can get to that state where we feel safe enough as NICU parents and families, which can be a
Mm.
longer journey for some than others, we can learn to regulate, and then we can
Mm.
enter into this playful state of being
Mm.
as a family unit. I just think that there's so much beauty that can happen for everyone,
Mm.
babies
Yeah.
and kids and parents alike. That, yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I'm going to say something that I think people will feel, but maybe a lot of people don't say out loud. I find a lot of play boring. I
Yes.
find a lot, yeah, I find
Mm,
a lot of, so I'm aware that I am most probably neurodivergent. I'm aware that that kind of dopamine hit for me or that kind of attention, I find it
mm,
difficult.
mm, mm,
So being able to switch focus and switch attention
mm,
from what I'm doing onto my kid and her being there and being like, let's have these little characters
mm,
talking to each other.
mm.
And I'm like struggling because I'm like, I am bored. I think
Yes.
that that is a really hard feeling because then I
Mm,
feel so guilty about that because
guilty.
I'm like,
Yeah.
I want to be able to play with my kid
Mm,
and I want to
mm,
be able to give her this, but I'm finding it really boring. So I think I'd just be interested to hear from you about like when you find
mm,
play hard as an adult,
mm,
whether you have any help feedback or anything that might
mm.
help with that.
Yeah. So in my book, Born to Play, I look at and I explain that even as adults, we have different play styles. And I think it's very
Mm,
important to know that we excel, if I can use that word, in certain play more than others. And maybe
right.
pretense play isn't your area that you A for Weber. Maybe we do silly dances in the kitchen, or maybe we I don't know, we like to do things outside and go for walks and do treasure hunts. Or my point is that I think that we, again, as I think social media is wonderful in ways and it can be tricky in other ways. I think we started viewing play as being or looking a very particular way.
Yeah.
And there are actually so many different play categories, and there's so many different like ways to be playful and to engage in play with our little humans. And that when a mismatch, and sometimes there are mismatches where it is either the type of play my child really wants me to be part of. Maybe it is from a sensory level that we have a sensory seeking toddler with a sensory sensitive parent, and that the way that they are pulling, and like I laugh, like my little one, for example, like he likes at the moment to play like barbershop, and it's like cutting hair, which is not really, because it's like pulling and yanking, and like
Hmm.
it's but luckily, I know my sensory profile. It can stay okay for a little while with that. But for a mom with a very very sensitive sensory, that's going to be torture. and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
at a point, we are going to snap, and then it's going to be like, oh, I wanted to play with them, and now I got irritated, and then we feel guilty about that.
Mm,
And I think sometimes it's like parents, I think they push themselves into certain play because, again, I think what we're seeing on social media is we need to play. But I just invite parents to, I think sometimes we have to pause and think, what do we view as play, and what do
mm,
we what do we say play isn't? Like maybe for you and your daughter, maybe building a puzzle is more enjoyable, or snuggling and reading books, or like
yeah.
I think that is the biggest thing, is that I think it is okay to step out of certain play situations if it is going to lead to, because kids feel that energy. I really do believe that kids can get to a point where they're like, now because we're feeling bored, we're starting to go through other lists in our mind, and we're actually there but we're not really there. And so I do invite parents to say, okay, think about what you deem as play and not play. And where is a beautiful match? Because they, like, I've yet to find families where they weren't actually already playing in a different way, but we're trying to
Yes.
push a very particular play agenda for whatever reason there might be. But there are so many different ways that we can play and engage with our child, where I feel like it, you then they can feel that you're really there, and like
Yeah.
that joy and exuberance. And I feel like both nervous systems are kind of in sync in a beautiful way. And I think for us to tap into those moments, that we can feel that we're both enjoying it, and because that's really what it should be, is that
Yeah.
connection and enjoyment. So I think invite parents to think about it's. First of all, I think it's okay to not enjoy all types of play. We're all human.
Yeah.
We have different sensory needs and preferences. And to think of what are the play categories or the other types of play I do enjoy with my child, and how can I create space for that? Because I also think, unfortunately, I often get the message on my account, and I think because of the work I do, that people think I play with my boys all day. I don't play with my boys all day. I actually think it's
Mm,
detrimental if we have an adult entering into children's play all the time. I
hmm.
I am very mindful that they need time and space to play independently from me. I'm nearby,
Mm,
I'm available, but I'm not always there directing or guiding,
yeah.
or and I think this is a little bit where social media, and I think maybe some of the messages can be confusing, because I think what we deem the parent role in play is almost to become the entertainer, or to become
Yeah.
the I always have to be the playmate. Or and I just want to again just give a little bit of, maybe it's like a little bit of an Excel that you can have, that it is also okay for your kids to play by themselves. I think it's
Yeah.
important. I think there's a lot that they learn through that independent free play. And yes, joining in your child's play is also beautiful and important. But I do think that it doesn't have to be all types of play all the time. I think it is good to reflect on what do we both enjoy, and
Yeah.
where do we both get that like laughs and giggles and connection, like real true connection from. Because I think sometimes we're trying to force connection, and then our mind wanders and things don't go the way they should, and like, why am I suddenly screaming? I was meant to be
Mm,
playing and something happened and I got triggered. And if we're constantly having those moments, it's only going to steal away, I think. Like if you are
yeah.
more of a dancing family, or maybe like you go on treasure walks with your little one and you find different things, like there's so many ways. Like I always love listening to family stories. There's so many ways to play.
Yeah.
And I just want people to keep that
Yeah.
in mind. It doesn't have to be one way. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think when you put it like that, you do realize you do play. It just doesn't look in
Yes.
that kind of certain way,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
I think something else that I kind of find is that like my husband is more able to be immediately playful. I think because he's probably got more capacity to be able to
Yes.
do that.
Yes.
I feel like I'm doing the mental
Mhm.
load a lot. You're holding a lot and
Absolutely.
doing a lot and all
Yeah.
of that kind of stuff. But then I kind of find that I do that beating myself up, that I'm not as playful. But I think being able to think about the things that I do and how I'm able to do it I really love
Yes.
that idea of thinking that there are
Mm-hmm.
different ways of playing. I just want to pick up on what you said a little bit about that kind of sensory profile bit. And I know that as parents of kids who have been in the NICU, that a lot of people relate to that kind of sensory differences. So maybe kids being more sensory sensitive or sensory seeking. I
Mm-hmm.
wondered if you could just talk a little bit about like how we might figure out for our kids what's going on from like a sensory perspective, maybe as they're getting a little bit older.
Yes, yes. And that's often, I feel like often in the toddler years is where we
Mm,
start as parents, usually noticing more sensory differences when our little ones are entering what, as occupational therapists, we like to call multisensory environments, where it might be play school, it might be that you're doing more meetups or going to the park more, but generally there's environment or situations where there's more unpredictable sensory input, where
yeah.
in homes we, and then I always love connecting with parents about it because we parents are actually so intuitive. We just, I think NICU can steal that as well, that
Mm,
confidence from parents. But when I listen to how parents do things in the house and how they structure things, they often start scaffolding beautifully for their own and their kids' sensory profiles. And it's when we go in the real world, which we need, where we start noticing, they might not like loud noises or noisy environments as much, and then they withdraw, or maybe they always want to be on the swings, or they always on the go, always moving. But we often start noticing things, and we might scaffold in our own homes for that, but we might start having, I wouldn't say like sticky moments out and about
mm,
in the world where maybe things become a little bit more challenging. And I always invite, if you feel like in any point that functionally self-care or engaging in play or engaging in anything that you and your child need to engage, if it becomes difficult to get more individualized support in that way. But we all sensory beings, and I think at a stage the sensory bin trend on social media maybe skewed the word sensory a little bit, but we all are processing sensory information all the time, and
yeah.
our brains all do it a little bit differently. We all have different thresholds of how much information we can take in at a time. Some of us can take in little amounts, some of us can take in big amounts, some of us might not notice everything like ideally we should. And those sensory beings live in the same household, and there can be goodness of fit mismatches. And I think this is an area I've become more passionate about now with my own matrescence and things, is looking at how are our little humans experiencing the world, how are the parents experiencing the world, and how are we merging all of this in the same household. Because we
Yeah.
can have, we think, okay, maybe having two sensitive beings in the same household is a for way. But if I can use the example of a colicky baby with a
Mm,
mom who is sensitive, and how overloaded mom's nervous system is getting from the crying. And so there's all these examples, and it can shift with different ages and stages of life and toddlerhood and then going into childhood. But we're constantly, there is going to be this constant interaction between all the sensory systems and how we go about things. And
mm,
all while, I mentioned the rocks earlier in our buckets, which can be the mental load that you said. It can be financial stress. It can be NICU trauma. It can be all of these things that reduces. And then
yeah.
I hope the imagery, and if the imagery doesn't make sense, I'll tag a little thing that you can add in the
Yeah, we
show
can share
notes.
it.
But
Yeah.
yeah, that essentially it just makes it that there's less capacity for water in your bucket, but there's so many rocks in it. So we can't
Yeah.
hold the same amount of sensory input, and eventually it is going to overflow. And that does look like irritability maybe in the house. It might look like me snapping, and I don't know why, but actually that bucket's been dripping. Things have been dripping in your bucket all day long, and as parents, we don't always have the time and opportunity to, like we've said earlier, to empty our bucket a little bit so we have that capacity. But it just really to invite that. I think that if you are seeing sensory differences in your child, whether it is that they're more sensitive, that they are more seeking, that if there's something that you can just see that it's bringing about more challenges, I feel that in social media, and that's the thing, is I know a lot of people go to social media or they go to Chat GPT or Claude or these
Yeah.
different things. And I think especially for me, the social media posts, they are not tailored to NICU families or preemie families
Yeah.
or children with medical needs or neurodivergent children necessarily. That's just always when someone sends me a tip and they're like, oh, this person suggested I handle tantrums in this way. Let's first of all look at who's giving that advice, which has also become a bit more problematic on social media. And second of
Mm.
all, this is very generic information. This is not necessarily, like, I do really feel that for our babies who've been through NICU, our babies who are toddlers who have been through might be premature, that if there are these additional considerations and you're getting this advice that it's just not working and it's likely
Yeah.
because I don't think taking all of that into consideration. If I can use a little example, I know I'm talking so much, but just to give
No.
families an understanding of how these early sensory kind of pathways in the brain develop. Like if we think about when we have a little baby in the womb and they're swishing around with amniotic fluid, and we've got this constant beautiful rhythmic motion, and maybe depending on what week gestation is, they've started turning upside down and now we've got the pull of gravity, but essentially we've got this mostly constant movement input throughout the day. Now we have this interruption of NICU,
Mm.
and our babies are lying in the isolates or incubators. Now, depending
Yeah.
how early our little ones were born or how many medical needs come about, how long that NICU journey might be. If we think about the movement input we get in NICU, it is
Mm.
very limited or there's no movement input.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
from this constant to this, I call quite a big disruption. And if we think about babies who are full term, who don't have complications, who don't have a NICU journey, who go home and they're being carried around, or they may be in a carrier or on mom's chest or being moved, or they've kind of have this gentle movement input that's ongoing. So for our NICU babies and our preemies who have a NICU journey, we've got this disruption where we go from we've had movement in the womb to minimal to no movement, and then we go home again. And my
Yeah.
boys were quite big examples for me, and especially as my eldest became older, like he's very sensitive to movement input. And for him, looking back, like so much makes sense, is that car rides, you go from no movement input to suddenly you're in a car and you're going on car rides and you're being passed from person to person, and then you're in a carrier, and then mom is rocking me because I'm crying and I'm not going to sleep, and as my scream is escalating, maybe mom is rocking me more or moving me about more. And
Yeah.
if you sometimes think about the amount of movement input that suddenly changes when these babies suddenly go home, but yet their bodies and brains have actually gotten used to minimal to no movement input.
Mm.
And
Mm.
depending on how sensitive your baby is, and babies are all different, and everyone has different ways of whether their bucket is small or bigger. But for my eldest, who had a very, very small, he still had a very small movement bucket, all of that movement input suddenly after NICU life, and I did try
Mm.
to regulate it as much as I could to make it gentle and predictable for him, it was still very overwhelming. And
Yeah.
it made for a very dysregulated baby in very different ways and different forms. But the point being of this whole journey I took you on with the movement system is that these early experiences matter, because our nervous systems develop through sensory experience. So the refinement of sensory systems happens through real life experiences. So if we
Mm.
compare a baby who's had a NICU journey to a full term baby who hasn't, who's gone womb to home and who's didn't have this disruption, how that's impacted how the neural pathways fire and wire together, it makes a difference. So when
Yeah.
our little ones, if we aren't able to meet them where they're at and give them the support they need, and this was one example. I mean, if we think about the touch system and the amount of pain input that NICU babies get that other babies don't get on a daily basis, like every sensory system, and there is, and maybe I'll send you the link in one of my podcast episodes, I actually go through each sensory system to just give examples of
That'd be great.
how different it is. Then we start
Yeah.
understanding that they are going to need some support maybe in the way they process sensory information after NICU. And
Yeah.
it doesn't mean every baby will, and I do want to be very gentle with this as well, because I think epigenetics is always at play. So depending on what genes we're sitting with and how life experiences switch on or switch off those genes, some babies might need more support than others. It doesn't mean everybody will, But I think that if we're noticing something that's just, we're needing to accommodate a lot, we're needing to scaffold so much, and the amount of energy that can sometimes take and cognitive load on a parent
Yeah.
when we know we're needing to accommodate for our child in so many ways, it
Mm.
might mean that a little bit of support can go a long way.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think it's really important. We'll definitely point people towards that episode because it's something that I've become really interested in as well. And I think just like you said about that overflow for yourself, me being able to pay attention to my sensory systems and kind of go like, okay, my capacity's going, I'm starting to flip over the edge a little bit. What do I need? Whether that's basic needs or whether that's sensory needs. Is it that I'm touched out? Is it that I've had too much noise? Is it what is it? And being able to kind of unpick that a little bit and just being able to accommodate those needs to start with to prevent it from overflowing, I think is really important. As we come to the end of the episode, you've given us so many nuggets and so much important stuff throughout it. But is there anything that you haven't said that you want NICU parents to know?
I think more than anything is to give yourself grace, because I feel like
Yeah.
it's the more I reflect on the journey and the experiences and the loss of experiences, because to me it's both. It's like I often say, like I feel like I'll always have a longing for the
Mm,
birth experience and the postpartum I didn't get, as well as a grief for what I
yeah.
did get. And
Yeah.
yeah, just holding space for that, because I think that it can be so hard to sometimes, I think, find, and that's why I love your community and I love the work that you do, that I think for NICU parents to find somewhere where we can say these things out loud, that's been so hard. And I think just to have grace, because I think for a parenting journey to start a NICU and for everything that has
Yeah.
to be built on that, it's yeah, it's a challenging road. And yeah, just to have grace and hope
Yeah.
for what is to come.
I love that. Thank you so, so much for your time. If people want to
Yeah.
find you, where's the best place for them to do that?
Yes, so at Playmore OT on Instagram is probably the best. And then I have my little side arm that I have started with more focus with for specifically my NICU passion, which is at Beyond Beeps and Hums. So those two will be the best place to find more, information on
Lovely.
the things I've discussed
Thank
today.
you. And we'll put all of your information in the show notes. We'll include your podcast and everything else in the show notes as well. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It was
All right.
amazing as always.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Nikki Space podcast by Miracle Moon. If this episode resonated with you, please know that support is available and you are always welcome in our community. If you found this episode helpful, one of the best ways to support the podcast is by sharing it, leaving a rating, or subscribing. It helps these conversations reach more NICU parents who really need them. You can also find us on Instagram and across social media at Miracle Moon UK, or explore more resources at miraclemoon.co.uk. Wherever you are in your NICU story, please remember this: you are not alone.